Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Once again, to speak about AI in project management. I'm really pleased to bring Nadja to the interviews today. Nadja, I met at GPMF out in Riyadh recently. Nadja, welcome.
Thank you, Lloyd. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Thank you, thank you. Nadja, do you want to just introduce yourself quickly?
Yes, so my name is Nadja El Fertasi. I'm the founder, the proud founder of Thrive with EQ, Emotional Intelligence. I focus on building an emotionally intelligent business society in the age of AI. Someone recently asked me, what do you mean by neurodivergent, Nadja? Because on my LinkedIn, I have proud neurodivergent. Is that I think very differently, and this is why I'm connecting the leadership aspect in business, the community aspect in helping people against scams through emotional manipulation, so to fight against that, and emotional well-being, and all under one umbrella, Thrive with EQ. So we maximize our human potential in the age of AI, and not only investing in AI and forgetting about the human potential. We have to upskill people as well.
Fantastic. Well, for anybody that has either watched or hear me recently, you'll know that when it comes to the intersection between AI and the human, I'm very excited about where the future is and where things stop and start in all of that. So let's get the ball rolling on a little bit of that for a second and just talk about our project profession and perhaps where you see AI today and maybe even tomorrow, Nadja.
So a little bit of background. I come from NATO. I worked there for almost 20 years, 18 years to be specific. And I was working in the biggest procurement agent. So I'm very much familiar with all the project management principles and ways of working. This is how we used to manage very big projects. And at that time, we were using software, not necessarily powered by artificial intelligence, but standard traditional project management methodologies, right? Based on Prince, on PMI, ITIL, and a few more. Now what we see is artificial intelligence has been around for quite some time, but now it's gotten more hype because it's been introduced to the consumer level, right? Now everyone can use AI and level up in one way or another. And I was recently at the Future of Work conference where someone presented that, and please forgive me, I don't have the statistics exactly, but by 2027, AI is foreseen to even surpass human intelligence in some area. So this begs the question, how are we going to upskill leadership, right, in terms of how do we lead project in the age of AI? Because as a technology, if you're not using AI, you're missing out. It will help you manage projects from a technical perspective, from a process perspective, but it also demands more of project management to become a creative thinker, to connect with stakeholders, because what is at risk in today's projects? The lack of trust, right? Lack of trust in the age of AI continues to increase. So I think the real challenge in the age of AI is not necessarily the technology itself at first, but understanding how are we changing the way we manage projects in terms of letting AI do what it does best, the technical stuff, the analytical, the forecasting, scenario planning, predictions to anticipate and reduce risk as much as possible. But how are you going to communicate that in different maps of the world from stakeholders so they feel reassured on the inside? And as you know, there are several stakeholders within projects, and they have different ways of thinking and deciding, and that requires emotional connection, that requires relationships. And a lot of people may have prompts for ChatGPT. How do I get stakeholder X to trust me, I'm not sure if that is the right approach.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, anecdotally, for at least the last few years, we're sort of being fed the rhetoric that AI can't be creative. AI, won't replace the human side of, or the soft skills side of a business change or a project. Um, it sounded to me like uh, you were somewhere in between that conversation where, maybe there's some layers where AI can help in whichever form, and we'll maybe dive into that in 1 second, but also that actually it came back to, well, how do I leverage that in the correct way? Have I understood that correctly?
Exactly. I think the biggest challenge people face, so you have two camps and maybe somewhere in the middle. The one camp is very excited about AI and perhaps over reliance and overusing of AI, not taking into account the human part, right? So you have now a surge of AI startups that are using, for example, one AI startup is having to address the challenge of how do you create human-like videos for business marketing. And they use AI avatars, which completely misses the point for me because it's not human, it's still a machine, right? So that for me is over reliance because you're basically manipulating people in a way that by portraying they're human or trying to replace that human connection, which maybe is possible in the future. I don't know. I am not an AI developer expert, but I think we have to be very careful there. And then you have the other camp, which is very agnostic, very resistant, like very fearful, very paranoia. AI is going to replace me. And I think the challenge is, as human beings, we have to rethink how we are human in a digital age. And that comes with great emotional discomfort. It comes with great ego deaths because we have constructed ourselves related to our functions, what we've been doing. Imagine you have a subject matter expert or a project management professional for 20 years who has been doing similar ways of working, and now all of a sudden AI comes and it's going to take big portion of their work. This is going to cause a lot of fear, a lot of discomfort, right? And if you don't embrace it and help people guide through it, you're not going to maximize the emotional experience, the human experience of those 20 years, and combine it with the power of AI to actually innovate to the next level and create something which hasn't been created yet. But in order to come to that point, we have to understand the emotional curve so we keep it balanced and not create technology that will deceive people. And we can talk about
Yeah,
risks that it has. And there's a
yeah,
lot of when we look at these technical conferences and AI experts. I don't like the word expert because if you see yourself as an expert, then we have so much to learn, and I think curiosity mindset is so important. But then you are actually missing the point of how are we creating a world where we don't even coexist, but we leverage the power in a new way without losing our humanity.
yeah. It made me think. I remember as a younger man, yes, I was younger one stage, going into steering groups where, you're presenting, let's call it numbers associated with a project. And very quickly, you lost the audience if there was one minor number that wasn't quite out of sync. You might as well have been presenting gobbledygook, as it were. And when you were speaking, it made me think about, you know, those people maybe in that same mindset of distrust everything because of one minutiae, and you know, we see that with Gen AI, where, you know, hallucinations and all of this up, you know, so you lose potentially the theme or the potential, maybe just the potential, because you get lost in the minutiae and all of the messaging gets lost, as it were. So that, you know, what you were saying was making me think about that. I was quite intrigued about this emotional curve as well, about, you know, just for people listening, just explain what those emotional curve is that you're referring to, and your anticipation, maybe in the guise of how I was framing that, if possible, Nadja.
Yeah, definitely. So when we look at change management, if we apply the framework of change management, which is familiar in project management, then change happens to us, but disruption happens within us. So change is experienced as in the same way as grief, when people grieve, when we have loss. So there is the Kubler-Ross model, which is an excellent one of, I find, great conceptual framework that shows the emotional curve of what happens when people experience loss, whether it's losing a person or losing a part of their identity, as we spoke here. So when we look at apply this in the form of AI transformation, if someone sees AI as a threat, the first stage, and they not necessarily in alphabetic order, right? You can experience these stages in different ways, but the first step is usual shock, right? Like, oh my God, what is this going to do to my job? Because in a way we are all self-centered. So what is impact on me? And after the shock, there's denial, right? Trying to resist it, or to put it under the rug, or just not existing. You have anger. There's a lot of frustration around it. Why is this happening, right? And you go through these quote unquote negative emotions, and negative emotions is a label. We have to understand that they are part of being human. So just because they're negative, often we try to suppress them, but we have to go through these feelings in order to embrace the change. At a certain point, you come to acceptance, like, okay, this is the cards which we were dealt with. This is where we are. How can we embrace it, right? How can we become more neutral? How we start negotiating? What can we do? How can we use it in a way? So a lot of people have no choice if an organization decides to implement a tool. With any tool, the first 6 months are terrible, because you have a lot of bugs, you have a lot of failure, even if you do testing. So you have to just get through it, and then you embrace it, and then you eventually feel excited about it. So when we look at change management, if we apply the same principles when managing processes or projects from a technical perspective, we can't do that with people, because then they will suppress their emotions. And when people suppress their emotions, it causes more stress, and it's going to affect their performance, and it's going to affect your ability for discernment, especially when you work with AI. I'm developing my own applications, and it's a wonderful tool, but if you're not discerning, it can come up with scenarios that can create political scandals. And sometimes I'm really laughing. I'm like, oh my God, if I would not have had the experience, or take a moment like to be very neutral and not too excited, too fearful, it can go the wrong way. This is what we have to understand when we upskill people in the age of AI, and specifically for project managers in how they manage projects. It's not only about the methodology or about everything you've learned. It's also understanding what is my internal relationship with AI on an emotional level, working through that, and then understanding how can I leverage AI to create and deliver the value for my projects. But if you're scared of
Yeah.
AI and you're suppressing it, at a certain point, it's going to come out. What you resist persists at the wrong point, and it's just going to lead to burnout, to conflict, to stress you won't be able to hold, misalignment with stakeholders, running over cost, right, etc. So you need to be able first to dive inwards and understand and understand where you are at the emotional curve, and then understand how am I going to lead project, not even manage, lead these projects and the teams.
Yeah,
AI.
I think I think from my point, Nadja, I was as you were speaking, I was thinking, well, obviously we need a change management plan as we implement AI solutions. And then I was starting to think, well, that's really interesting. You know, we as project management profession are used to doing our stakeholder mapping, you know, high influence, high impact, all of that great stuff. But actually, I think in this case, because it's still relatively new technology, you almost need to do that inwardly to the project team as well as those impacted, as it were. You know, for me, it really points towards that change management piece. However, and I'll just leave that there for 1 second. I was also kind of intrigued what you said right at the beginning of the conversation about, you know, those people who are massive supporters, and the if I paraphrase, the distinguishing between the video editor that's using humans, creating human avatars but with AI. And I was thinking, well, that gets really interesting when you can't distinguish between human and AI. And we know that we're on the cusp of that. And here we are only a couple of years in, really, into this journey. So who knows what we're going to be in a few years' time when they're not just, you know, digital avatars, maybe they're physical avatars and all of this sort of stuff as well. So, you know, obviously alarm bells ringing already about that. What's your thoughts here about the you know, the negative scenario that may play out with AI?
So I'm actually currently in the process of writing a book about this, about how to build emotional firewalls and protect people, data, and trust. It's a working title, especially when we look at deepfake, because when we look at where AI is now, it's at its worst, right? And it's already very good, but it's at its worst. So you can only imagine at the pace that we are already at the point that certain videos, you can't tell the difference. Now, life, everything in life is polarity. You have opportunity and you have risk. And the artificial intelligence is being used as a surface, so as a tool, as the surface for innovation, but it's also being used as an attack vector, meaning that it's being used to manipulate people. And one of the biggest challenges is how do you teach people discernment skills against manipulation? Because it's easier to hack people's emotions than to hack technology, right? For example, there was this article about how many blockchain security were circumvented, and blockchain is very secure, but someone lost or leaked their private key, still in human hands, right? So you invest as a company a lot in blockchain, for example. And I'm not saying that this is not a solution. This is definitely an important solution. But if you omit the human vulnerable risk, then everything you've invested in is gone into fume. So we won't be able to stop it. But here I think project managers shine in terms of the risk management hat, right? You really need to be able to stay ahead of the risk and come up with risk scenarios and how it will impact your project specifically. You won't be able to solve it for the whole company or the whole world, but you have to think in terms of, okay, what is the outcome of my project and what is the risk of someone being manipulated and then getting access into data? Because especially as project management, if one variable in the project gets hacked or gets accessed, it can influence the entire project. The other thing I think, so one element is how do you teach people discernment skills? Not even there's no point in teaching people to recognize deepfake. Even highly trained MIT experts were unable to differentiate it in the study they showed. So instead, let's go back to basic. How do we teach people to spot manipulation, whether it's online or offline? I mean, everyone manipulates every day, right? We're facing this. But now we have to get really serious with discernment skills. So this is one. Second, you need to create a psychological safety as a project manager. And this is not only dependent on you, but on the top leadership and the culture, for people to feel safe to speak up. One of the biggest challenges we faced also in NATO is that when there was a mistake or a problem early on in the project, it remained hidden because they feared the repercussions. If that's the culture within your team, within your company, then that problem is going to turn into a full-blown crisis with much bigger ramification you can't contain anymore. So how do you celebrate mistakes in the sense when reported early or when people feel safe to speak up? Then there's cultural, right? The organizations with high power distance, people are trained to not go against their leadership or challenge them. It's seen as very disrespectful, right? Or not helping if you have someone who's very generous, right? I flew into Riyadh. Everyone was sharing their Wi-Fi passport so Nadja could navigate because my Wi-Fi wasn't working. But it's a risk as well, because if it comes in the wrong hand, then now someone can hack into a mobile phone, install malware, and if it's connected to a business network and hub, now they're in. So these are things you may not necessarily think about, but how do you at least acknowledge it and then build a company culture around it? It reduces the risk as much as possible. You don't want to change people, but you want to change behaviors. Right?
Yeah. I think everything you're saying is fantastic, and I'm just conscious of time in terms of these recordings. I'm sure we could carry on. I'm going to attempt to summarize our conversation, or maybe this is part one of a conversation. I think first of all, the backdrop is that it's inevitable. AI is coming for us and we're only just starting this journey. I heard very clearly that we need change management plans for all elements of the project, within the project, and those stakeholders that are impacted to the project. The third thing I heard was about the need, and it's the first time I've really heard it so eloquently put around risk management. And not just the technical security, but risk as us as humans, which obviously is linked with change as well. And then the last bit that you were just talking about, and I think it's really interesting, that point is, because on the one hand you've got AI will surface some insights which were previously hidden, and we see that in our prediction world right at the beginning. The most likely outcome of a project, people may not want to hear that, but then you're linking that with the cultural change as well, and the positivity of knowing that truth, and therefore you can be on the front foot to react and all of that sort of stuff. So that was my sort of summary, but if you wanted to summarize or provide listeners to a takeaway of this conversation, what would it be, Nadja?
I would say continue what you're doing. It's not about stop like revolutionizing, is that the English? Yes. Project management, but integrate emotional intelligence in your project management principles. So in every step, when you start with the feasibility study, integrate emotional intelligence in terms of how are people going to be a risk or an opportunity, and how do we mitigate it? When you develop the project initiation document, especially when you look at stakeholders, not only external stakeholders, but internal stakeholders, right? How are you going to manage the psychological safety in terms of reporting, not waiting until there's a crisis, but beforehand? How are you going to address people's functional self-regard? When you look at self-regard, is an emotional intelligence marker, is all about how much we like ourselves in light of both our positive and blind spots. From a functional perspective, if you have someone who is an engineer for 25 years and who thinks in a particular way, they may not necessarily have an expanded view that is necessary with all the other functions and change their behavior accordingly. So how do you create this curiosity mindset and help people become comfortable feeling uncomfortable? Because growth and change is uncomfortable and we resist it. But how do you incorporate, whether it's through training, awareness, leadership? You are also a coach as a project manager in terms of creating that psychological safety within people. Right? How do you integrate emotional intelligence during the execution phase? Everyone is motivated in the beginning, but when challenges hit, the motivation starts wearing off. So you need to be connected to the vision and understanding how to use empathy, optimism, for example, social responsibility, emotional expression, interpersonal relations. These are all markers that you can use to actually keep people disciplined and checked in, to help them release that emotional burden when it comes to high, so they can reset and continue on the way. And then how are you going to use it when you have closure, to not only identify lessons learned from a technical perspective, but also from an emotional perspective? Where did we have more risk that it was unnecessary? How did the reporting, how did the stakeholder engagement, how did we build trust? What can we have to do differently? Often when we look at project management, we think about it because it's not necessarily in the certification process or in the methodologies, from a conceptual perspective, from a methodology perspective. But we can use models. There are scientifically validated models, but just being a coach in general and understanding the human aspect. People are under a lot of pressure, and when people operate under pressure, they don't necessarily do rational things. It doesn't mean that they're irrational, but when we feel stress, our brain communicates to our body that we are under threat. So we function from a very limited energetic perspective, right? We do what we don't behave rationally. This is why hindsight, when we have all these investigations, if when there are data breaches, for example, and then people, well, how could this happen? Well, stress impacts. I mean, if AI is stressed, it's kind of predictable what behavior it will do. But when people are stressed, it comes with unpredictability. So it's really integrating that dimension in reducing the human risk as much as possible, and having adaptability within the team, within yourself, within the company, to adapt as a human being and manage the discomfort that comes with it.
It's fantastic. I love everything that you've said today, Nadja. And I, for one, will be making sure that all of my projects have emotional intelligence at the front, the middle, and the tail of them. So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for that thought-provoking conversation. And I look forward to keeping in touch with you and seeing how your journey goes.
Thank you, Lloyd. It was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me and for having these thought-provoking questions.
Fantastic. Thank you.